You open your eyes to a dim room of rough wood and straw. The light leaking through the cracks in the shutters is not electric. It is dawn, pale and cold, filtered through the smoke of a smouldering hearth. The air smells of damp wool, ashes, and something earthy that you cannot name. Outside, a rooster announces a new day, though you sense no urgency in the sound. The medieval world wakes slowly. If you woke up here, somewhere in a small English village around the year 1350, you would not know the hour. There are no clocks in the room, no ticking mechanisms, no sense of measured time at all. Instead, time is divided by sound: the rooster's cry, the church bell in the distance, the low murmuring of animals. You are no one important here. You are simply awake, a villager among perhaps 200 others who live and die within sight of this place. The first sensation is cold. The blanket, a coarse wool sheet, barely holds warmth. The floor is uneven, made of packed earth covered in straw. A faint trickle of light reveals the interior. A wooden chest, a few clay pots, a bundle of herbs hanging from a rafter. The hearth at the center is long dead, leaving behind a ghost of smoke that has turned the beams above black. Everything smells of people, animals, and smoke, the scent of a world that never leaves you. You hear movement nearby, a woman stirring, perhaps your wife in this strange life, rising before dawn to light the fire. She moves slowly, methodically, feeding small twigs to the embers she preserved beneath the ashes overnight. Fire is not taken for granted. Without it, the day cannot begin. Matches do not exist. To start a new flame from flint and steel is labor, and so every night the coals are buried in ashes, preserved like treasure. The first sounds of the village reach your ears. A cough through the wall, a child crying, a pig snorting somewhere close. Wooden doors creak open. The light outside grows a little stronger, revealing thatched roofs still glistening with dew. It is morning in the 14th century. The small house you inhabit is not yours, but rather the Lord's. You are a villein, a peasant bound to the manor, who owes labor to the local lord in exchange for the right to work a strip of land. You cannot leave the village without permission, and if you were to vanish, the bailiff would eventually come asking questions. This is not a world of freedom. It is a world of obligation, of known faces and inherited duties. As you step outside, you realize how small everything feels. The village sits in a shallow valley surrounded by ploughed fields and pasture. The fields are long and narrow, separated by low ridges. Beyond them, woods form a boundary dark and full of mystery. Few people ever walk far into those trees. The forest is the edge of the known world. Men and women are already moving about, figures wrapped in wool, heads covered, feet muddied. The smell of smoke thickens as each household rekindles its hearth. Somewhere a blacksmith hammers faintly. The rhythm of the day is beginning. There is no hurry. The medieval day unfolds with the patience of sunlight. You might begin your morning by walking to the well, a short distance away near the village green. The bucket is heavy and damp, the rope rough on your hands. You pull water that smells faintly of iron and soil. It will be used for everything: drinking, cooking, washing, feeding animals. Water is life here, and every drop is carried by hand. There is no soap as you know it, only a coarse lye made from ashes and fat. People smell of the world around them, of work, of earth, of wood smoke. You notice that no one seems ashamed of this. Cleanliness is a moral matter, not a physical one. To be clean of sin is far more important than to be clean of dirt. Nearby, a few children chase a chicken. Their laughter feels strange against the otherwise steady quiet of the morning. Most adults are already about their tasks: feeding livestock, mending fences, carrying tools. The sound of bells begins faintly in the distance, from the manor chapel or perhaps from a nearby monastery. The bells do not mark time as we do, they mark devotion. Each hour belongs not to the day but to God. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint chant of the matins bell, the first of the canonical hours. It is an invitation, a rhythm that carries through every medieval life, even for those who never step into a church. You would bow your head, briefly perhaps, acknowledging something greater that governs all things. You sense that even silence here has a sound: the crackle of fire, the bleating of goats, the steady breathing of the earth beneath your feet. The village is a system that functions without written plans. Everyone knows their place. The reeve, the man appointed to oversee work on behalf of the Lord, walks slowly through the village, carrying a short staff. He counts heads, notes absences, and ensures the obligations of the day are met. Each household owes so many days of labor to the Lord's demesne, the central field whose harvest belongs not to the peasant but to the manor. The reeve might call your name. Today could be one of those days when you must work the Lord's land instead of your own. The difference matters deeply. On your own strips, you labor for your family. On the Lord's, you labor for your duty. The tools of your trade are simple: a wooden, handled sickle, a hoe, a spade with an iron edge that has been sharpened so many times it now bears the shape of years. There is no surplus of tools. If one breaks, it must be repaired or replaced by hand. The blacksmith, one of the few skilled tradesmen, works with an authority born from necessity. In the distance, a small group gathers at the edge of a field. You join them. The land smells of dew and manure. The soil is heavy clay, difficult to turn, but fertile when worked properly. The men move slowly, quietly. There is little speech. Each person knows what to do. The oxen pull the plough, their hooves sinking deep into the mud. The plough's iron tip cuts a thin line through the earth, folding it over. Each furrow feels deliberate, almost sacred. This is how life continues. This is how survival is earned. The sun rises higher now, though the light remains pale. There is no sense of hurry, no noise of machines. The only rhythm is that of hands, steps, and breath. Occasionally, someone pauses to straighten their back, to look across the wide brown field toward the small shapes of the village in the distance. You realize how self-contained this world is. The boundaries of existence are visible from where you stand. To the east lies the manor, a stone building surrounded by small barns. To the west, the church spire, its bell calling out faintly each hour. Beyond that, nothing known, nothing trusted. The thought is both comforting and suffocating. As the morning deepens, you begin to notice small details. The caw of crows following the plough, hoping for worms, the sound of water in the ditches, the sharp smell of wet iron and soil. Every sense is engaged. The medieval world is not quiet, it is dense, layered with texture. Around mid-morning, the work pauses briefly. Someone brings bread, coarse, dark, baked from rye and barley. It is heavy and slightly sour. A piece of cheese is shared among several hands. You eat slowly, grateful. Every bite has weight, every crumb is the product of effort. There is no conversation about the future, no plans for travel or wealth. The concerns of the day are enough: the weather, the yield, the Lord's temper, the health of the animals. When you look toward the village again, you see smoke rising from the chimneys. The children are gone, likely sent to gather wood or tend to geese. A cart passes on the rough path, its wheels creaking. Life moves, but it never rushes. This is the rhythm of medieval existence. Work, rest, prayer, repetition. The days blur together, anchored only by the church calendar and the seasons, and yet beneath this monotony there is a quiet endurance. Each person here carries centuries of inherited knowledge: how to bake without yeast, how to read the sky, how to find herbs that soothe your fever. Nothing is written down, but everything is remembered. By noon, the sun stands high. You remove your hood and wipe your brow with a rough sleeve. The air is filled with dust and pollen. Someone nearby hums a tune, an old song without words. It drifts across the field, forgotten as soon as it ends. You look toward the horizon and imagine the world beyond. The cities, the monasteries, the sea. But you realize that for most people here, such places might as well not exist. The village is the world, and you, for reasons you do not yet understand, are part of it. As the work resumes, you begin to notice how the land itself dictates everything. The slope of the field, the depth of the furrow, the way the water drains after rain. The medieval farmer knows this by instinct. The rhythm of ploughing and planting is not taught but lived. In the distance, the bell rings again. Sext, the midday prayer. Tools are set aside, heads bow briefly. A few words are murmured. Then the sound fades and the work continues. You realize that nothing here happens without purpose. Every motion serves survival. Even rest is rationed according to daylight. The afternoon stretches on, slow and even. The wind changes, bringing with it the faint scent of the forest. You wonder what creatures live there: wolves, perhaps, or deer that no one dares to hunt without the Lord's permission. The forest belongs to him, as does the game within it. Everything, in one way or another, belongs to someone else. And yet the villagers endure. They laugh, they sing, they love, they hope, quietly, without expecting more than tomorrow's dawn. As the sun begins to lower, shadows stretch long across the fields. The oxen are led back to their pens. The tools are cleaned and hung. You walk slowly toward the village, your feet heavy with mud, your thoughts heavier still. The day is ending, but life here will continue much the same tomorrow. You glance toward the horizon, where the faint outline of the manor stands against the fading light. The windows catch the sun briefly before dimming again. You wonder what it would feel like to live not as a peasant, but as the lord of this place, to wake to bread baked by others, to own the fields instead of working them. But then you remember, in this world, even lords serve someone higher. As you return to your small house, you notice smoke curling from the chimney, the familiar scent of cooking broth drifting through the evening air. Children laugh softly nearby. The village settles into its quiet night rhythm. The stars will rise soon, and the only light will come from fire. Tomorrow will be nearly the same as today, and the day after, much the same again. In this world, time itself seems to sleep, and you too begin to feel the pull of rest, the kind of sleep that belongs not to dreams but to endurance. The fire is burning low again. The house is lit only by its flicker and by the faint glow that leaks through cracks in the door. Smoke coils lazily toward the rafters, darkening the beams further. You can barely see the faces around you. A woman stirring a pot of thin stew, a child sitting cross-legged on the floor, plucking straw from a mat. Dinner is not an event here. It is a continuation of the day's labor. The bread you eat is hard from yesterday's baking. The stew is a mixture of barley, cabbage, onions, and perhaps a sliver of salted meat, if luck or trade allowed for it. The spoon you hold is carved from wood. The bowl is chipped clay. The taste is bland but filling. It is the taste of survival. Outside, the village hums faintly. The sound is not loud, but constant. A cough from one house, the bleating of a goat, the dull bark of a dog. There are no streets as you know them, only paths trodden by feet and hooves. The smell of smoke hangs over everything. The air is heavy and somehow still comforting. After the meal, work does not end. The woman, your wife in this borrowed life, mends clothing by the fire. Her hands move with quiet precision, threading a bone needle through coarse fabric. There is no waste. Everything is patched, reused, or remade. The candle beside her burns slowly, dripping wax onto a rough wooden stand. Candles are expensive. Most peasants rely on rushlights, thin reeds dipped in animal fat. They burn quickly, unevenly, and release a faint smell of tallow. Children sleep early, wrapped in blankets stuffed with straw. Their dreams are short, their rest deep. Life here is tiring but honest. You hear the low murmur of a prayer. The paternoster, said quietly, half from devotion, half from habit. Every evening ends this way. The presence of faith is not a choice but a fact of life, stitched into every breath. You find yourself whispering along, uncertain if you mean the words or merely mimic them. Outside, the night has fallen completely. There is no moon tonight. The village becomes a world of sound rather than sight. Doors are barred with wooden beams. The fire is banked once more beneath ashes. Darkness presses against the walls. This is not the silence you know. It is alive, full of creaks, breaths, and distant echoes. Somewhere, a dog growls at nothing. You hear a cartwheel turn in the wind. There are no lights in the distance. No horizon of glowing towns. The night belongs entirely to the earth, and to those brave enough to walk within it. If you were to step outside now, your eyes would find nothing but shadow. The stars above would be cold and bright, like holes punched through the black fabric of the sky. The Milky Way would be clearer than you have ever seen it. A river of faint white dust flowing silently above a sleeping world. But you would not linger long. People in this time do not trust the dark. The night, to them, is not empty. It is full of possibilities both earthly and divine, thieves, wolves, spirits, and sins. To wander after curfew could bring suspicion or worse. The village reeve or one of the watchmen might ask questions. The church warns against nighttime idleness. It is said that unholy thoughts breed best in the dark. You stay inside. You sleep when the fire fades and the chill begins to bite. The straw beneath you rustles faintly. The smell of smoke lingers in your hair, and slowly the blackness becomes sleep. You wake before dawn again. There is no concept of an alarm, no clock to measure the hour. You wake because the body must, because the rhythm of survival demands it. Outside, the air is cold and damp. A faint mist crawls along the ground, catching on the low hedges and fences. The day begins with chores, always chores. Your first task is to feed the animals, a small collection of pigs and chickens kept near the edge of the village. The pigs root noisily in the mud. Their eyes reflect the dim morning light, curious and unafraid. You toss them scraps from yesterday's meal, vegetable peels, crusts of bread, bits of bone. Nothing here is wasted. The chickens flutter and cluck at your feet. Their eggs are precious though few. Some days you find none at all. The woman you share this house with carries water again. Her movements are sure, practiced. The bucket leaves a wet trail across the floor. She pours some into a pot and begins preparing dough for bread. There is no yeast, only a sour mixture saved from yesterday's baking. She kneads the dough with strong hands dusted in flour. Her breath forms small clouds in the cold air. The bread will take hours to bake, not in an oven, but in a clay structure near the common green. It will be shared among several families. one batch after another. The smell of baking fills the air, thick and sweet, one of the few comforts that pierces the monotony. As the morning brightens, men begin to gather near the manor gate. Today is not a work day for the Lord's fields, but for the villagers' own. You join them, carrying your tools. The reeve nods in passing, his presence always a reminder that no one here is free from scrutiny. The path to the fields is slick from dew. Birds cry overhead. In the distance, a woman sings a slow song as she walks, a tune older than anyone remembers. Your land, your strips of land, are narrow and irregular, scattered among those of your neighbors. Each piece must be worked separately, a system designed to share both the good soil and the poor. You spend hours turning the earth, careful to follow the same furrows year after year. The soil is your inheritance, but not your property. It belongs to the Lord. You merely borrow it with labor. At midday, the bell sounds again, a distant, echoing call from the chapel. The villagers pause, some kneeling briefly in the fields. The prayer is short, whispered, almost wordless. It is as much habit as belief. You eat again bread, cheese, a cup of thin ale. Water is rarely trusted, often carrying sickness. All weak and cloudy, is safer. A fermented drink that children also consume. It tastes of grain and smoke. You think for a moment of how little changes here. The faces around you are the same. The voice is familiar. Birth, marriage, death. These are the only markers of time. Everything else repeats. The sameness of it feels both comforting and endless. After work, you walk briefly toward the edge of the forest. The path narrows as it enters the trees. You stop before the shadow thickens. Few villagers go far inside. The forest belongs to the Lord and to the unknown. Cutting wood, hunting game, or even gathering fallen branches without permission can bring fines, or worse, punishment. But still, you look. The forest hums with its own silence. The rustle of leaves, the faint snap of twigs, the breath of wind moving through tall oaks. Somewhere in that darkness lies freedom, or danger, or both. By late afternoon, you return home. The village is louder now, smiths hammering, women calling to one another, children running between houses. A cart loaded with sacks of grain creaks past, bound for the manor storehouse. The air smells of sweat, dust, and bread. You notice a small group near the chapel. The priest in his worn black robe is speaking to several villagers. His Latin is half understood, his tone gentle but absolute. He speaks of sin, confession, and the harvest to come. He blesses them with a gesture that feels practiced and wary. Religion here is not grand or distant. It is woven into every corner of life, from how people speak to how they sleep. The church calendar dictates not just holy days, but when to plant, when to fast, when to rest. The villagers listen not because they must, but because they know no other world. That evening, a faint excitement stirs in the air. Tomorrow will be market day, one of the few times people leave the village. The nearest market town is a few miles away, reachable by a dirt road that often floods after rain. The journey will take most of the day, but it is worth it. There you can trade surplus grain or eggs for salt, cloth, or tools. You prepare quietly, setting aside a small sack of goods. The woman wraps it in cloth, tying the bundle carefully. The anticipation is not loud, it hums beneath the surface, a rare deviation from routine. Outside, the last light fades. The bell sounds vespers, the evening prayer. The fire crackles once more. Children drift to sleep. The air grows still. As you sit near the hearth, you notice a spider moving across the wall, its shadow flickering in the firelight. The simplicity of the scene feels timeless, so ordinary that it becomes sacred. You wonder what thoughts filled the minds of people here centuries ago. Did they dream of change, of distant lands, of peace? Or did they, like you now, simply drift through the slow rhythm of days, content to belong to something older than themselves? Night falls fully again. The stars return, the air grows colder. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. The sound carries across the fields and is answered by the barking of dogs. The village remains still, its people asleep, trusting in walls of mud and thatch. You lie awake a little longer, staring into the darkness, listening to the breath of those around you. The fire's last embers glow faintly red. You think of tomorrow, of the market, of the road beyond the hill, of what lies past the edges of this tiny world. Then, slowly, you drift again towards sleep. And as the quiet deepens, you find yourself wondering if you could not read, could not write, could not see beyond your own fields. Would you still dream of freedom? The morning of market day begins before dawn. You wake to the sound of footsteps and whispering, neighbors moving outside, the shuffle of boots on frost, hardened earth. A thin fog clings to the village, silvered by the faint light of the moon. The air is sharp and cold, your breath visible as you exhale. Inside, the fire is already lit. The woman has wrapped the bread you baked yesterday in cloth, tucking it into a basket. Beside it lies a small sack of barley, some eggs, and a length of rough, spun wool. All you have to trade. It is not much, but then, few people here ever have much. Outside, the cart is ready. It's nothing more than a wooden box on two wheels, pulled by an ox whose pace defines the journey. You join two neighbors, both silent, both half asleep, and begin down the rutted road that leads out of the village. The journey has begun. As the village fades behind you, you notice how quiet the countryside feels. The fields stretch wide and empty, their furrows gleaming faintly with dew. Crows scatter before you, their wings black against the mist. Here and there, a distant figure bends to work even at this early hour, the kind of work that never ends, no matter what the calendar says. The path is uneven, carved by centuries of use. Wheels sink into mud from recent rain. Occasionally, the ox slows to rest, steam rising from its nostrils. No one speaks. The rhythm of the road is its own kind of prayer. The first village you pass is little more than a cluster of houses and a chapel. Smoke curls from chimneys. A few people stand by the roadside, watching the travelers pass. They nod politely, though few words are exchanged. In the medieval world, even a short journey feels significant, a brief crossing between self-contained lives. By mid-morning, you crest a small hill. Beyond it lies the market town, a patchwork of roofs and chimneys surrounded by low wooden fences. The church spire rises above it all, pointing like a finger toward heaven. It is not a large town, but compared to your village, it feels vast. You hear it before you see it clearly. The distant clatter of carts, the bleating of sheep, the murmur of voices. And then, as you draw nearer, the smell reaches you, a mixture of wood smoke, fish, manure, and bread. It is overwhelming, alive, and strangely human. The town gates stand open. They are not guarded, though a man with a ledger sits nearby, collecting small tolls. A few coins are exchanged. The ox pulls the cart through. You are inside. The market square is a swirl of motion and sound. Stalls are set up along every side. Tables covered in cloth, baskets of vegetables, piles of grain, wheels of cheese, tools, and pottery. Voices overlap in a low, constant murmur. Chickens scurry between feet. Children chase each other, laughing. For a moment, it feels as though all of life is gathered here. You find a place to stop the cart and unload your goods. The space you choose is marked by nothing, just an open spot near a stone trough where others are already setting up. You spread a rough cloth on the ground and arrange your small collections: eggs, bread, barley, wool. The market is not a spectacle, it is a negotiation of needs. A woman offers salt for grain. A man trades leather scraps for eggs. Another sells honey, his hands sticky and shining. The currency is fluid, part barter, part coin, part trust. You sell a few eggs, exchange some barley for a wedge of hard cheese. A small cloth merchant admires your wool and offers a few pennies for it. The sound of clinking metal in your hand feels strange. Money is rare, heavy, and valuable. As you move through the market, you begin to notice how the town differs from the village. The people dress more richly, their clothes dyed in muted colors, faded blues, browns, and reds. Some wear shoes of soft leather rather than the clumsy boots of field workers. You hear accents you don't recognize, traders from other manors, or perhaps from across the sea. There is news, too. A man reads from a parchment nailed to a post, an announcement from the king's court about new taxes, new wars. Most people cannot read, but they gather anyway, listening to the words as someone recites them aloud. The names and places are distant, barely real, yet the effects ripple outward. Even here, even now, decisions made in far-off halls will change the rhythm of your days. Near the edge of the square stands a small church. Its door is open, and the sound of chanting drifts faintly from within. You step closer, curious. Inside, the light is dim and golden, filtered through narrow stained glass windows. The priest moves slowly before the altar, his voice a monotone of Latin phrases. A few townspeople kneel on the cold stone floor. Some make the sign of the cross as you enter. The smell of incense lingers in the air, sweet, thick, otherworldly. Here, you feel the same smallness you felt in the fields, but in a different way. Outside, you are part of the earth. In here, you are part of eternity. You stay only a moment, long enough to whisper a short prayer for good weather, for a healthy harvest, for safety on the road home. The priest barely notices you. He continues his chant, his voice blending with the soft rustle of robes and the flicker of candles. Back in the square, the market is at its height. Minstrels play near the well, a flute, a drum, a low hum of voices singing a simple tune about St. George or springtime. Children clap in rhythm. Nearby, a juggler tosses wooden balls into the air. For a world built on repetition and duty, this small display feels almost miraculous. But there is also tension here. You notice a man arguing with a merchant over the price of salt. Another complains that the Lord's men have increased the toll for crossing the bridge. A few beggars sit against the walls, hands outstretched, eyes downcast. Poverty is everywhere, even in the place that seems most alive. By afternoon, clouds begin to gather. The air cools. Traders start packing their wares. You return to your cart, your small basket lighter, your pouch of coins slightly heavier. The journey home will take the rest of the day. The road feels different on the way back, quieter, more reflective. The ox moves slowly, its hooves leaving shallow prints in the mud. Behind you, the town fades into a blur of smoke and sound. Ahead lies the long ribbon of earth leading back to your village. Your hands rest on your knees, rough from work. The coins in your pouch jingle softly. You think about what you've seen. The stalls, the strangers, the songs. For the first time, the world feels slightly larger than before. But as the path narrows and the fields reappear, you also understand something else. Most people will never leave this small circle of life. Their stories begin and end within the same horizon. By the time you return, dusk has fallen. The village glows faintly with firelight. The smell of cooking fills the air once again. Children run to greet the carts, hoping for sweets or trinkets. You hand over the small wedge of cheese, the salt, and the new knife blade you managed to buy. They are received with quiet gratitude. Inside the house, the fire is already lit. The woman unwraps the bread you traded for and sets it near the hearth. You sit down, stretching sore legs, feeling the weight of the day settle into your bones. Outside, the last bell of the day sounds, compline, the prayer before sleep. Its low tone drifts through the night air, unhurried, ancient. After supper, the neighbors gather briefly outside. Someone tells a story about the market, a rumor of plague in another town, a whisper of unrest between lords, a merchant who claimed to have seen the sea. These stories travel faster than carts, changing shape with each telling. They are the medieval version of news of wonder. Someone laughs. Someone crosses themselves. The fire crackles. The stars blink overhead, patient and cold. And slowly, one by one, doors close. You stay outside a moment longer. The village lies quiet now. A handful of lights, the faint rustle of the wind through straw roofs. You look toward the distant forest, its darkness stretching endlessly beyond the fields. It occurs to you that, even in a life of repetition, there is meaning. Every furrow plowed, every loaf baked, every candle lit is a small defiance against the void. An assertion that life, even in its dullest form, matters. You look at your hands, rough, calloused, marked by labor, and realize they are the same hands that built cathedrals, that turned soil into bread, that carried the world forward grain by grain. The history of civilization was written not by kings or saints, but by these hands. Later, as you lie down beside the dying fire, you think once more of the market, the sound of coins, the shimmer of color, the scent of incense. For a brief moment, the world had seemed wide and possible. But now, in the deep stillness of the village night, it narrows again, into the familiar rhythm of breath and firelight, and you realize this too is peace. The rooster will crow again tomorrow, the bell will ring, the plough will turn, and the world, ancient and unchanged, will awaken once more. You wake before sunrise again, but this time your thoughts are not on ploughing or markets, they are on hunger. It is late winter in the same small village you've come to know, the year 1348 perhaps, or something close. The fields lie bare, the earth frozen and unyielding. The stores of grain have grown thin. The fire in the hearth flickers weakly, fed by the last scraps of wood. The smell of smoke mixes with the faint, sour odor of stored grain. Rye mostly, dark and dusty from the sacks kept in the loft above. Bread is life here. But before it becomes bread, it must first survive the earth. You step outside, your breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. The sky is pale grey, the kind that promises snow before noon. The ground crunches beneath your boots, half frozen mud and straw mingled together. In the distance, the Lord's granary stands like a silent threat, a tall, guarded storehouse where most of the harvest from last autumn is kept. You may see it every day, but it is not yours to touch. The grain inside belongs to the manor, and from it, the tithes are measured, the dues counted, the lives balanced. Your own household has a small chest of grain remaining, a mix of rye, barley, and oats. Enough, perhaps, for a few more weeks. After that, there is only hope and borrowed favors. This is the lean season, the hungry gap, when the old stores run out before the new harvest comes in. Every year it returns, quiet and merciless. Today, you walk to the fields with a sack over your shoulder. Inside is seed grain. the most precious of all possessions. You cannot eat it, no matter how empty your stomach feels. To consume the seed is to steal from the future. The field is cold and wet, but you kneel anyway, pressing your hands into the soil. The texture is rough, clinging to your fingers. You cast the seed by hand, scattering it in long, careful arcs. Each movement is practiced, inherited. Behind you, another villager follows, covering the seed lightly with a wooden rake. The rhythm is almost meditative: throw, step, drag, throw, step, drag. This act, ancient, repetitive, unglamorous, is the foundation of civilization, and you can feel it, the weight of every generation that performed the same motion before you. The village priest passes on the road, murmuring a blessing over the sown field. He traces a cross in the air, his breath forming small clouds. Religion and hunger are intertwined here. You cannot think of one without the other. May the Lord bless the seed and the hands that sow it, he says softly. You bow your head. By mid-morning, snow begins to fall, thin, dry flakes that cling to your cloak. The work slows. You stand and stretch your back, watching as the grey sky lowers toward the fields. The oxen are led away, snorting clouds into the cold air. Tools are gathered. The sown field lies behind you, a patch of brown earth speckled with white. To the untrained eye, it looks barren. But to you, and to every peasant who has ever lived, it is a promise buried in the ground. When you return home, the fire has been coaxed back to life. The woman is at the table, grinding grain on a small hand mill. Two circular stones stacked one atop the other, turned by slow, deliberate motion. The sound is rough and rhythmic: crrr, crrr, crrr. The flour it produces is not the soft white powder you might imagine, but coarse, greyish meal filled with bits of husk and grit. It will wear down your teeth over time, just as it has worn down countless generations before. Beside her sits a wooden trove where she mixes the meal with water and a pinch of salt, forming a thick dough. She kneads it patiently, her hands firm, her face expressionless. Each press of her palms is an act of faith, that this dough, however small, will rise enough to fill bellies. The oven she will use is not her own. Few peasants in this village are allowed to bake bread at home. The Lord controls the communal oven, and each family must pay a small fee, a baking tax, for the privilege of using it. To bake secretly in one's own hearth is a risk. If discovered, it can mean fines or confiscation. So when the dough is ready, you carry it together to the bakehouse near the green. Smoke curls from its chimney, mingling with the smell of yeast and ash. Inside, several families wait their turn. Each carries their own dough, marked with a small symbol carved into the surface, a cross, a flower, a line, so they can recognize it later among the loaves. The oven is vast, made of clay and stone. Its mouth glows faintly red, the fire inside reduced now to hot embers. The baker, a large man with a soot-streaked face, works silently, pushing loaves inside with a long wooden paddle. When it is your turn, you hand him your dough. He nods, slides it into the oven, and marks your symbol on a small slate near the wall. Then you wait. The waiting is slow. The air is thick with warmth and smoke. Children doze against the wall. The sound of crackling fire fills the space. Bread is not just food here. It is the rhythm of community. People talk in low voices while they wait about weather, about the manor's taxes, about whose cow is sick. Even gossip feels heavy, weighed down by fatigue and hunger. Someone mentions that a traveller passing through claimed to have seen famine in a nearby shire. Another says that rats have found their way into the Lord's storehouse. The conversation turns uneasy. Everyone knows how quickly a year of hunger can come. When the baker finally opens the oven, the smell is overwhelming, rich, earthy, slightly burnt. Loaves are drawn out one by one, dark brown and hard-crusted. Each is identified by its mark and handed back to its owner. Yours is heavier than expected, though small. The crust is rough, the inside dense and moist. It will keep for several days if you are careful. You hold it in both hands, feeling the faint warmth through the cloth. For a moment, it feels sacred. You carry it home slowly. The village feels quieter now, the snow melting into slush beneath your feet. Smoke rises from every chimney. Inside, you place the loaf on the table. The woman cuts it into thin slices, one for each person. A child watches silently, eyes wide. The knife squeaks faintly against the crust. The first bite is hard to chew, but warm and satisfying. The flavor is sour, the texture heavy, yet it fills the body in a way that no stew or porridge can. Bread, even coarse and dark, is the difference between strength and weakness, between work and collapse. After the meal, you save the crumbs. Nothing is wasted. The heel of the loaf will be soaked in broth tomorrow, the crusts dried for later. You look at the remaining half on the table and feel both relief and worry. Relief for today. worry for the days that follow. Outside, the snow begins again, thin and steady. The world feels suspended, waiting for spring, for warmth, for the next harvest that will begin the cycle anew. Before sleep, you kneel briefly before the hearth, murmuring a small prayer for the land that feeds us, for the seed that sleeps beneath the frost. The fire crackles, and you feel its warmth against your face. You realize that survival here is not a single act, but a series of repetitions. Sowing, grinding, kneading, baking, each one carried out with patience that borders on faith. And as you drift toward sleep, you wonder, when hunger is constant, does gratitude become a kind of prayer too? By the time the first shoots of grain appear, a thin green haze over the brown fields, the hunger has already set in. This is the cruel paradox of the medieval year, when the land begins to promise new life. The old stores are nearly gone. The body grows weakest just as the earth begins to wake. You rise each morning still hungry, but the hunger has become familiar, like a dull ache behind the ribs. It no longer surprises you, it simply is. The routine of survival resumes: tending animals, mending fences, patching thatch. Each act is quiet, deliberate, endlessly repeated. And through it all runs one thought: the harvest. The Lord's share, the first green shoots in the field, are not truly yours. When they ripen into full grain, months from now, you will owe your share to many others. The Lord's reeve will come to measure what the land has produced, recording it on a wax tablet. A tenth for the church, a portion for the manor, a tithe for the miller and baker. By the time your own family eats, the loaf will have passed through many hands, each taking its fraction of your labor. You know this, but you still work the field with care. For if the harvest fails, no one above you will bear the loss. The reeve himself visits today. He is not cruel exactly, just methodical. He carries a small staff and wears a wool cloak finer than yours, though worn thin at the edges. His shoes are dry even in mud, and that alone marks his difference. He walks the boundary of each strip of land, marking notes for the Lord's records. His eyes linger on the newer fields, reclaimed from the forest last year. These, he says, must yield better now that the soil has rested. You nod and agree, though you know the truth. The winter rains have washed half the seed away. But you say nothing. Complaints can be costly. The measure of bread that night, the talk around the hearth turns to taxes. It always does, as naturally as the talk of weather or illness. Someone mentions that the tithe collector has raised his measure again. Another says the Lord's steward is sending grain to market early, hoping for a higher price. You listen quietly, breaking your bread into small pieces. The loaf is thin now, mixed with ground peas and beans to make it stretch further. Its taste is sorrower than before, the texture almost gritty. Still, you chew it slowly, letting it fill the silence. Every crumb you eat carries a history of obligations, a calculation of who owns what. Bread, you realize, is the perfect symbol of the feudal world: heavy, divided, indispensable. The grain and the law. A week later, a man is brought before the manor court, his crime baking in secret. The Lord's oven, as always, demands a tax for use. But this man, a widower with too many mouths to feed, tried to build his own clay oven behind his hut. Smoke gave him away. The reeve's men found the half-burned loaf still inside. Now, in the cold open air, the man kneels before the Lord's steward. The villagers gather quietly at the edge of the green. The steward announces the fine: a quarter of his grain and a week of labor in the manor fields. The man nods once, shoulders sagging. No one speaks. The sound of crows fills the silence. Later, some whisper that the Lord himself rarely eats the bread baked by his people. His table holds white loaves made from sifted wheat, bread soft as clouds. Such fineness feels like another world entirely. The grinding, you visit the mill the next day, carrying a small sack of barley on your shoulder. The mill stands by the stream at the edge of the wood, its great wheel turning slowly with the water's current. The sound is steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Inside, dust fills the air. The miller, a broad man with flour in his beard, greets you with a nod. He knows your name, knows everyone's. His fee is fixed, one measure from every 10 of grain ground. You pour your grain into the hopper, watching it vanish between the stones. The air smells of ground husk, sharp and dry. You cough, blinking away the dust. The miller hums softly as he works, pausing now and then to adjust the stones. Each turn of the wheel is power. Power taken from the stream, from nature itself. You marvel quietly at it, though the thought is fleeting. When your flour is ready, the miller weighs it, scoops his due, and ties your sack. He hands it back with a smile that never reaches his eyes. You thank him and leave, though you notice he keeps the heavier scoop for himself. Everyone knows it, but no one speaks. The miller's word is law, and the Lord's men protect his wheel. The market spring deepens. The roads soften with rain, and small markets begin again on the edge of nearby towns. You travel one morning, walking with a few others. The air smells of wet soil and livestock. Chickens squawk. Pigs grunt in the mud. Traders shout prices. At a stall, you see loaves larger and whiter than any you've ever baked. They cost more than you can imagine paying. Nearby, a woman sells coarse rye bread for a few small coins, bread not unlike your own. You trade a little dried fish for one loaf, then wrap it carefully in cloth. As you wander, you overhear talk of distant places, cities where famine is spreading, villages emptied by plague, caravans lost to bandits. The words drift through the air like smoke. You wonder how fragile it all is. This system that keeps bread on your table, that ties every mouth to every harvest. The famine year by midsummer, the grain stands tall and green. The sight should bring comfort, but you have lived long enough to know better. Rain and wind can ruin everything. This year storms come early. The sky stays grey for days, the wind flattening patches of barley like trampled grass. When the rains stop, the stalks rise again, but the heads are lighter, thinner. The reeve walks the fields and frowns. His notes grow longer. You feel it in your gut. Another poor harvest. Then one morning, you wake to find mildew spreading through the lower fields. The grain there smells faintly sweet, almost rotten. The air is heavy and still. The priest calls it God's punishment for sin. The steward calls it nature's will. But to you, it is simply hunger, returning earlier than expected. Quiet defiance in the evenings, people whisper of resistance. A few families have begun keeping small hand mills again, hidden beneath floorboards or in old sheds. Grinding in secret at night, they escape the miller's fee. Others bake in covered pits behind their homes, the smoke disguised by the smell of the hearth. It is dangerous. Fines, sometimes even imprisonment, but desperation breeds silence and silence breeds courage. You do the same one night. You wait until the moon is high and the village sleeps. You kneel beside a shallow pit you dug near the hedge where a small fire burns low. The dough is ready, dark, heavy, sticky. You cover it with a clay lid and heap warm ashes on top. Hours later, when you lift the lid, the smell nearly breaks you. Warm, earthy, alive. The bread is rough and uneven, but it is yours. For once, no teeth, no tax, no overseer has touched it. You eat a piece in silence, eyes closed. It tastes like defiance, like something that belongs wholly to you. The harvest looms when the time of reaping comes. You stand again in the same field where months ago you cast seed into frozen soil. The stalks sway under the sun, pale gold and dry. You cut them by hand, one bundle at a time. The sickle's rhythm is steady, ancient. The same motion your ancestors made, the same motion your children will learn. Behind you, the gleaners wait, the poorest of the village, mostly widows and children, allowed to gather what falls to the ground after harvest. Their hands are quick, their movements quiet. Every handful matters. Every stalk means survival. When the last sheaf is bound, you straighten and look across the fields. The harvest is smaller than last year. You can see it in the piles, shorter, fewer, lighter. And yet, you feel a strange calm. The work is done. The cycle has completed itself again. You will pay your dues as always. You will grind your share, bake your bread, ration it through the winter. But deep down, you carry a quiet thought that maybe one day you will bake again beneath the moon without permission, just once more. As you walk home, the sky glows with the last red light of summer. Smoke drifts from chimneys. The smell of new bread lingers in the air, faint but unmistakable. And you wonder, when the systems of power depend on hunger, does every loaf of stolen bread become a small act of freedom? The harvest has ended, the fields have turned to stubble, and the first cold nights of autumn are returning. Smoke rises from every chimney now, and the air smells of damp straw and wood ash. The year's work should be over, but in truth, it never ends. For as soon as the grain is gathered, the calculations begin. The counting, you watch as the Lord's men arrive at the granary. Carts creaking, ledgers in hand. The reeve walks ahead, pointing and noting, his expression as neutral as always. The steward follows, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Every sack of grain is weighed and recorded. The numbers decide how much will go to the manor, how much to the church, and how much remains for the village. You stand aside with the others, your back straight, your eyes lowered. When your turn comes, the reeve measures your portion with practiced ease. 1 bushel for the Lord, 1 for the church, and another small part for milling fees. He marks it down without emotion, his stylus scratching against wax. By the time he is finished, your pile is half of what you carried in. You say nothing. Everyone says nothing. The Lord's loaf that evening. As you return home, you pass by the manor kitchen. Through the open window comes the smell of white bread. Soft wheat loaves baked for the Lord's table. The scent is almost otherworldly, sweet and warm, so unlike the sour, coarse rye of the village. Inside, servants carry trays, their sleeves rolled to the elbow. You glimpse the loaves cooling on wooden racks, pale, perfect, each one dusted lightly with flour. You pause for a moment to look. Then you turn away. You know this, the Lord's bread is baked from the same grain that passed through your hands. It is, in a way, your labor turned into his luxury. And yet the hunger you feel as you walk home is not bitterness. It is older, quieter, a hunger that expects nothing more than the next crust to chew. The winter store, the cold arrives early. Frost clings to the roof at dawn, and the well's water forms a thin film of ice. You bring your grain indoors, storing it in the loft above the hearth. Each sack is tied tightly, marked with a simple piece of cloth. Mice scratch faintly at night, but the cat does its work. Every few days, the woman measures a small portion, grinds it, and bakes. Each loaf is smaller than the last. Each slice is cut thinner. You learn to make things stretch, bread crusts boiled in water to make broth. Ground acorns mixed with rye to form dough. The last crumbs dried and stored for feast days. There is comfort in routine. There has to be. The bread riots one morning. Distant bells ring from the direction of the town. You hear shouts, faint at first, then clearer. Word travels quickly. Merchants have raised the price of bread again. By noon, rumors fill the village. Some say townsfolk gathered at the market, overturning carts and demanding fair prices. Others say the baker's shop was broken into and the loaves taken. The priest calls it sin. The villagers call it justice. You remember the feel of that secret loaf you baked in the earth months ago. Its weight, its warmth, and you understand why people would risk punishment for it. Bread is not luxury. It is existence. To take it away is to threaten life itself. The hidden loaves by midwinter, hunger returns in earnest. You've saved a few loaves, wrapped in linen and hung near the hearth. But the air is damp and one has grown mouldy. You scrape it clean, cut away the worst, and soak the rest in broth. The taste is sour but filling. At night, you dream of fields again, not the ones you sowed, but endless plains of grain under a warm sun. When you wake, you can almost smell it. In the village, people trade whatever they can spare for food. Old clothes, tools, even bits of jewelry. The miller grows richer, his sacks of grain hidden beneath the floor, and quietly, families begin to bake in secret again. The smoke is faint, the fires small, the nights long. Each hidden loaf feels like defiance, a quiet protest against a world designed to keep you hungry. The plague and the plenty then, suddenly everything changes. It begins in the next shire, whispers of a sickness spreading through towns. By spring, it reaches your village. The first to fall ill is the reeve himself, his face pale and swollen. Then the miller's wife, then the steward. The church bells toll without rest. The air smells of smoke and fear. But within weeks, something unexpected happens. Fields are left untended, taxes go uncollected. There are fewer mouths to feed, fewer hands to take the bread from others. The granaries remain fuller than before. For the first time in your life, you find yourself with enough. The same bread that once felt like bondage now feels like liberation. You eat without counting, without guilt. You bake when you wish, using the oven that was once forbidden. You do not call it freedom, not yet. The word feels too large, too foreign, but you feel its edge. The price of a loaf years pass. The world changes slowly. You notice it first in the market. Laborers, fewer now after the plague, begin to ask for better wages. Bread grows cheaper. The Lord's steward speaks less of tithers, more of keeping tenants content. It is a strange reversal, as though death itself has loosened the tightness of the old order. You bake again that evening, standing before your hearth. The dough is simple: flour, water, a pinch of salt. But your hands move easily, no longer rushed or fearful. The bread rises, its crust cracking softly in the fire's warmth. When it's done, you place it on the table and sit in silence. The loaf is smaller than you remember, darker than the Lord's white bread, but it is entirely your own. You break it in half and share it, and for the first time, you realize something profound. The power of a loaf is not in its cost or its size. It lies in the labor it represents, in the hands that made it, the patience that baked it, and the hunger that shaped its worth. The memory of hunger. In the years that follow, stories of famine fade into memory. Children grow without knowing true hunger. But among the older villagers, the memory lingers, like a scar you can't quite see but still feel beneath the skin. They still save crumbs. They still measure grain with careful hands. They still whisper thanks before every meal. Because somewhere deep inside they remember what it meant to go without. You too remember. The sound of the hand mill grinding in the dark. The smell of dough baked in secrecy. The way bread could make the difference between obedience and defiance. Now, as you sit in the twilight of your life, you think of those long seasons of toil, the endless sowing, harvesting, kneading. It all feels distant, yet close enough to touch. You look at the new generation, the children running across the green, their laughter echoing where once only hunger spoke, and you wonder if they will ever understand how something so simple could hold the weight of the world. You break one last crust between your fingers and whisper quietly to yourself, "We built our world on bread. We just forgot how heavy it was." The fire dies down. The smell of baked rye fills the air one last time. Outside, the fields lie quiet under the stars. The same earth that took your labor, your prayers, your hope, and returned it in loaves. You close your eyes, full at last. And somewhere in the distance, a mill wheel turns slowly in the dark, eternal, patient, unchanged. Would you like to continue to story 3, The Candle and the Clock, Timekeeping Before Time, where we explore how medieval people measured hours before mechanical clocks, and how time itself was once governed by faith, weather, and firelight? You wake again, though this time not to the crow of a rooster or the call of a reeve. You wake because the bell has spoken. The sound rolls through the still air, heavy and resonant, 1, 2, 3 slow tolls, calling the monks of the nearby priory to matins, the first prayer of the day. It is deep night. The stars are still visible through the frost on the window's edge. The world is silent except for the distant rhythm of that bell, echoing across the valley. It is not meant for you, this sound, but you have learned to live by it all the same. Time without clocks, it is the year 1280, or close to it. The mechanical clock does not yet exist in this village. Time, as you know it, is measured not by ticking gears or glass hands, but by sensation, by the warmth of sunlight, the length of a shadow, the angle of smoke rising from a hearth. Each sound in the day tells its own time. The bell that wakes the monks for prayer, the rhythm of the smith's hammer in the mid-morning air, the lowing of cattle as they're driven home at dusk. Every sound marks a rhythm, a pulse in the slow heartbeat of medieval life. The hours of God, the church divides the day into 8 canonical hours, sacred intervals of prayer that structure not only the monastery, but the entire rhythm of the countryside around it. They are Martin Zevers before dawn, Lauds at first light, Primes around sunrise, Terce Sext and None mid-morning to mid-afternoon, Vespers at dusk, and Compline before sleep. The monks in the priory live by these hours with perfect obedience. They rise in the dark to chant psalms by candlelight, their voices weaving through stone halls. But even outside the cloister, time bends to these rhythms. When the priory bell rings, peasants pause their work, traders mark the changing light, and even the smallest child learns, almost by instinct, the pattern of the hours. You do not own a clock, but you feel time as surely as if it were written in the sky. The candles light in your small cottage. There is only one candle burning, made of tallow, thick and uneven. It gives off more smoke than light, but it is precious. You watch the wax melt, pooling at the base, and think of how candles themselves were once instruments of time. Monks often used candle clocks to measure their vigils, candles of known length, marked with lines to show how long each section would burn. When the flame reached a mark, they knew it was time to change prayer, to turn the page, or to wake the next watch. You have no such marks on yours, but you can sense the passing of minutes in the way the light fades and flickers. The candle bends, the wax spills over, the flame shrinks and grows again, a small, living measure of the night. The bell and the body, when the bell tolls again for louds, you know dawn is close. The faintest hint of blue light filters through the cracks in the wall. The world stirs, you pull on your cloak and step outside. Frost coats the ground, smoke curls from nearby chimneys, and the air smells faintly of wood and cold iron. In the fields beyond, a few figures are already at work, their movements slow and steady. They do not check the time, they feel it in their bones. Time, in the medieval sense, is not something owned but something obeyed. You wake when the light returns, work until your shadow stretches long, rest when it disappears. The day's rhythm is written not in numbers but in your body. The priory, you walk toward the priory, following the sound of chanting that carries faintly through the cold air. The building stands at the edge of the village, its stone walls pale against the morning mist. Inside, a small group of monks kneel in the choir, their voices low and steady. Candles line the altar, their flames swaying gently. The sound of their prayer, psalms in Latin, feels both endless and timeless. You notice how the monks move not by command but by instinct. Each knows when to bow, when to rise, when to change verse. Their internal sense of time is precise, but it is not mechanical. It is spiritual, born of repetition and faith. To them, time is not a resource to be spent, but a path to be walked. The sundial after the service, you see one of the monks step outside to tend the small garden near the gate. Beside it stands a stone sundial, a flat disc carved with simple lines and numbers. The monk adjusts its position carefully, watching as the morning sun strikes its edge. You ask him, quietly, how it works. He smiles faintly. The shadow tells us when to pray, he says. When it falls across sext, we eat. When it reaches vespers, we rest. He traces a finger along the worn surface, then adds, but only when the sun allows it. On cloudy days, we trust our hearts instead. You nod, realizing how different this is from the time you know. The sundial depends on patience, on waiting. It cannot rush, it cannot demand. The sun will move as it always has, whether you are ready or not. The slow noon, by midday, the village is fully awake. The smith's hammer rings in the distance, sheep bleat in the fields, the smell of baking bread drifts faintly from a nearby hearth. It is sext, the 6th hour after sunrise, the time for rest and food. There is no bell this time, only the subtle stillness that falls over the land when everyone pauses at once. You sit on a low wall near the well, tearing a small piece of bread and chewing slowly. You think of how every day follows this same rhythm, not hurried, not idle, but steady. The world does not chase time here, it simply moves within it. The passing of light afternoon drifts quietly into evening. The sky softens from blue to gold to grey. When the sun touches the far hills, you know it is vespers. The bell tolls again, its sound deep and resonant. The monks gather to sing their final prayers before nightfall. You stand at your doorway listening. The fields grow dark. A faint mist rises, and as the last light fades, you realize that this, the balance between day and night, sound and silence, is the measure of medieval time. Not seconds or hours, but transitions. Not precision, but patience. You return inside, light your candle again, and sit by the small table. The flame sways softly, marking the slow descent into darkness. In this quiet, you wonder, when did humanity decide that time should tick instead of flow? The year is somewhere in the late 13th century. Across Europe, towers are rising, tall, stone skeletons crowned with bells and newly built wooden frameworks. But this time something is different. Inside the shadowed interiors of monasteries and cathedrals, behind thick oak doors, craftsmen are building strange devices of iron and brass, mechanisms that move on their own. They are heavy, awkward, and crude. They make too much noise. They break often, and yet they are about to change humanity's relationship with the very concept of time. The dream of the mechanism, it begins, as many things do in the Middle Ages, with prayer. Monastic life demanded precision. The canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, divided the day not by convenience but by devotion. Missing a bell by even a few minutes meant a disruption in sacred order. Candles burned unevenly. Water clocks froze in the winter. Sundials failed on cloudy days. So the monks began to wonder, could a machine keep time better than the sun? The birth of the mechanical clock. The first mechanical clocks appeared in England, France, and Italy around the year 1300. Their exact origins are uncertain. No one person invented the clock. It emerged quietly from the patient labor of blacksmiths, scholars, and church craftsmen. These early clocks had no faces, no hands, and no dials. They told time by sound, the rhythmic tolling of a bell, marking each passing hour. The mechanism that made this possible was simple but revolutionary. The verge and foliot escapement, a verge of vertical rod, turned by a slowly descending weight, locked and released in a steady rhythm. The foliot, a horizontal bar with adjustable weights, controlled the pace. The result, a regular tick, the first heartbeat of mechanical time. For the first time in human history, time no longer depended on the heavens. It was made by machines. The tower clock, you can imagine it now. A great wooden frame, set high within the tower of a cathedral. Iron gears, as wide as shields, meshing with slow, deliberate force. A rope wound around a drum, holding a massive stone weight. When the monk in charge, the custos horologi, released the weight, the machine began to move. With each slow swing of the verge, a gear turned and a hammer struck the bell. Once every hour, the sound rolled across the city, deep, metallic, and astonishingly regular. Villagers below began to order their days by the bell's pattern. Merchants opened stalls when it rang the first hour after dawn. Bakers watched its rhythm for the timing of their ovens. The sound that once marked only prayer now marked work. Time had become both sacred and practical. The bell and the marketplace. By the mid-1300s, towns across Europe began competing for the best and most reliable clocks. Florence built one for its Palazzo Vecchio. Milan installed one near the cathedral. In England, Salisbury and Wells followed soon after. Each city wanted not just precision, but prestige. The clock tower became a symbol, a monument of order and progress. For centuries, time had been felt through shadow, hunger, or the movement of stars. Now it was heard, rung into existence by bronze and iron. A merchant could tell his apprentices when to begin and end work. A guard could track his nightly patrol. A council could meet at a fixed hour. The world began to align itself not with sunrise, but with schedule. The monk and the metalworker still, not everyone welcomed this change. In some monasteries, the new mechanical clocks were seen as both miracle and intrusion. The old monks, used to waking by instinct and candlelight, found the regular tick unsettling. The bell now rang without human touch. Time had escaped human hands and entered the realm of machinery, but younger brothers saw it differently. The clock, to them, was an act of devotion, a perfect rhythm in honor of God's own order. The medieval chronicle of Richard of Wallingford tells of one such man, an English abbot and mathematician at St. Albans in the early 1300s, who designed a monumental astronomical clock. His device not only marked the hours but tracked the motion of the sun, moon, and tides. It was called the Albion. It was never fully completed, but its design survives as one of the earliest attempts to model the cosmos mechanically. Richard himself was dying of leprosy when he built it. His hands deformed, his body failing, and yet he persisted, piece by piece, forging time into metal. Perhaps as he worked, he saw not just a tool for prayer, but a reflection of divine precision, the universe itself as a clock. The spread of hours. By the 14th century, the sound of time began to spread beyond monastery walls. Cities began to regulate labor by the bell. Courts convened. At the third hour, markets opened. By the toll of 9, ship captains at harbour synchronized their watches by the cathedral bells. For the first time, everyone lived by a shared rhythm. Before this, a peasant might say, "We will meet when the sun is halfway down." Now he could say, "We will meet at the 7th hour." It was a quiet but monumental shift. Time had become not just a condition of nature, but a social agreement. The problem of precision, of course. The early clocks were far from perfect. They ran fast in summer, slow in winter. Humidity warped the wood, weights slipped, gears jammed. Sometimes the bell rang twice or not at all. To correct this, monks and caretakers developed the practice of observation. Each day, they compared the mechanical clock with natural signs. Sunrise, the position of the sun, the length of shadows. Then they adjusted the foliate bar, adding or removing small weights to speed or slow the rhythm. Timekeeping became a daily ritual, part science, part faith. Each morning, someone climbed the tower stairs, listening carefully to the tick, feeling the vibration through the beams, tightening ropes, oiling iron. The sound of the mechanism echoed through the stone. Tick, pause, tick, pause. It was not exact, but it was alive. The public bell. The sound of bells was everywhere in the medieval city. There were bells for prayer, for work, for curfew, for death. Bells to warn of fire, to mark festivals, to announce coronations. People learned their meaning by tone and rhythm: the short, rapid peal for alarm, the slow, deep toll for evening rest. Time was not read on a face but heard as a melody. In some towns, the bell became so central to daily life that the sound was regulated by law. In Paris, for instance, the ringing of La Cloche du Palais announced the opening of the courts. In Bologna, the campanone signaled the start of lectures at the university. The bell had become the voice of authority, the mechanical sound of civilization itself, the rhythm of labor. As mechanical time took hold, it began to shape not only prayer and trade, but labor itself. Artisans began to measure tasks in hours. Workdays became fixed, from the first bell of morning to the final curfew toll. The rhythm of the body began to conform to the rhythm of the machine. No longer did one work simply until the sun set or until hunger called for rest. Now one worked until the bell. Some historians call this the beginning of temporal discipline, the subtle but powerful conditioning that would, centuries later, give rise to factories, schedules, and the modern workday. It began here in the dim towers of cathedrals, where monks once sought only to measure prayer. The new silence, and yet, despite its power, mechanical time also introduced something new: silence. Before, the rhythm of the day was marked by the natural world, birds, wind, footsteps, animals. Now, the clock's ticking filled that silence, but it also created a sense of absence when it stopped. If the clock failed, if its bell did not toll, the village seemed unmoored, uncertain. People felt anxious, as though the day itself had fallen out of order. It is strange to imagine that only a generation earlier, no one would have noticed. The division of time. By the end of the 14th century, the hour had become a fixed idea. And soon, so would the minute. In Italy, early clockmakers began adding faces, circular dials with a single hand marking 12 divisions. By the 1400s, the two-handed clock appeared. Time had become not just something to live by, but something to see. Numbers replaced instinct. Measurement replaced rhythm. Observation replaced patience. The world had entered a new age, one ruled not by the rising of the sun, but by the mechanical pulse of iron and brass. You sit again beneath the tower, hearing the faint, regular chime of the bell. It feels eternal, precise, dependable, and yet something in you misses the soundless time of before. The candle, the shadow, the rhythm of light. You wonder, when we built machines to measure time, did we also begin to lose it? The sound of the clock tower has changed. It no longer feels like a call to prayer. It is sharper, more demanding, echoing with purpose. By the 15th century, the once spiritual rhythm of bells had entered the realm of commerce, power, and discipline. Europe was awakening, not to devotion, but to precision. Time was becoming something new, a currency. The city and the clock. Imagine Florence at dawn in the late 1400s. The first light spills across tiled roofs and narrow alleys, catching on the bronze face of the city's great clock. The bell rings 6 times. Shops open. Apprentices hurry through the streets, carrying bundles of cloth and tools. A merchant shouts to his assistant, "You are late, the 6th hour has struck." That phrase, once reserved for monks marking sext, now belongs to the marketplace. The clock no longer speaks for God, it speaks for business. The new order of hours, the idea of regular hours, began to shape every corner of society. Markets set opening times, guilds defined work hours, courts scheduled hearings, and ships, guided by timepieces, synchronized departures by the bell. In Venice, the arsenal, the great shipyard, rang a bell to start and end each shift. The rhythm of production became so precise that the Venetian galleys could be assembled almost like clockwork. This was no longer time as a background to life. It was time as structure, an invisible frame shaping every human activity. You could now measure not just hours of prayer, but hours of profit. The portable clock. Around the same time, a new invention appeared: the spring-driven clock. It replaced the heavy weights of tower clocks with a coiled spring, allowing clocks to be smaller, lighter, and portable. The earliest versions, built in the early 1500s, were worn by nobles and merchants as symbols of refinement and intellect. They were often shaped like small drums or pomanders, richly decorated with gold and enamel. They were inaccurate, but they were powerful in another way. They represented control over time itself. To wear time on your person was to declare mastery over the invisible. And for the first time, time could travel. The personalization of time. Before, time had been public. You heard it in the bells, you saw it in the shadow. Now, time became private. With a clock or watch, a person could live by their own schedule, independent of the tower or the sun. This was both liberation and confinement. The merchant could work longer into the night. The scholar could write until the candle burned out. The sailor could track his hours even in the middle of the sea. The heartbeat of the world had moved from the church tower into the human pocket. The age of exploration, time took on new importance in the great voyages of the 15th and 16th centuries. As European ships crossed oceans, they needed to measure longitude, a problem unsolved for centuries because it required precise timekeeping. Without an accurate clock, sailors could know their latitude by the stars, but not their east-west position. It was not until the 18th century that John Harrison, an English carpenter and clockmaker, built the marine chronometer, a device that kept steady time at sea. With it, captains could finally navigate across the globe with accuracy. Empires, trade, and colonization all followed the tick of that clock. The conquest of time had made possible the conquest of the world. The tyranny of the bell. By the 17th century, the clock had moved from cathedral to factory, from monastery to manor. Each ring of the bell, each tick of the pendulum marked not prayer but productivity. In London, textile mills rang bells to summon workers at dawn and release them at dusk. In Nuremberg, the great clockmakers' guilds produced hundreds of domestic clocks each year. In Geneva, the art of watchmaking became both industry and art, a symbol of a new, regulated civilization. The clock had ceased to be a servant, it had become a master, The discipline of minutes, the invention of the pendulum clock by Christian Huygens in 1656 changed everything again. Its accuracy, within seconds per day, transformed the measurement of time from estimation to certainty. The face of the clock grew more complex. The single hand for hours gave way to a smaller hand for minutes, and eventually, another for seconds. Now, life could be divided into smaller and smaller units. Every moment was measurable, and thus accountable. Factories began to post timetables. Schools rang bells for lessons. Armies synchronized attacks. The pulse of time became the pulse of order. The Industrial Revolution, by the late 18th century, Britain's landscape was filled with chimneys and smoke. Factories replaced fields. The rhythm of machines replaced the rhythm of seasons. The workers' days were carved into strict shifts. The clock on the factory wall dictated when to start, when to stop, when to rest. Even the shortest delay, a few minutes, became punishable. The human body, once guided by daylight and fatigue, now obeyed the iron tempo of gears. Poets and thinkers began to notice. William Blake called it the mind-forged manacle. Others spoke of a world enslaved by the tick of its own inventions. Time, once fluid and sacred, had hardened into schedule and profit. The global clock by the 19th century, the clock ruled not just towns but continents. The invention of the railway made synchronized time essential. Trains had to depart and arrive according to the same clock. Yet every town still followed its own local time, based on the sun's position. This led to chaos, missed trains and accidents. So, in 1884, at a conference in Washington, representatives from 25 nations agreed to adopt a single system, Greenwich Mean Time. The world was divided into 24 zones, each 1 hour apart. The sun no longer decided time. We did. Every corner of the earth now ticked to the same rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat echoing from one side of the planet to the other. The vanishing of night electric light extended the hours further still. Factories stayed open through the night. Shops illuminated their windows until dawn. Even the stars seemed dimmer against the glow of human industry. The candle that once measured the night's vigil was replaced by the unblinking light bulb. Eternal, mechanical, unending. The night no longer meant rest. It meant productivity, progress, continuity. The boundary between day and night, sacred and secular, silence and labor, dissolved. Humanity had conquered darkness, and in doing so, it had conquered rest. The whisper of the past, but still, somewhere in the rhythm of your pulse, the old world remains. The body remembers what the bell and shadow once taught it, to slow with the dusk, to wake with the light, to breathe in the rhythm of seasons. You can still feel it if you listen, the pause between heartbeats, the stillness between one second and the next. That is the time that existed before clocks, the time of being, not measuring. It is not lost, only buried beneath the ticking. Reflection, you sit by your candle again, perhaps only in memory now, and listen to the silence between each faint sound. The world outside is full of clocks on phones, walls, towers, wrists. Each one keeps perfect time, and yet perfection can be wearying. You begin to wonder. When the bell first tolled in the medieval night, it marked prayer, not pressure. When the candle burned low, it measured patience, not progress. Now that time obeys us completely. Do we still belong to it? You blow out the candle. The room falls quiet. Somewhere far away, a clock chimes the hour. The sound is steady, familiar, and endless. A lullaby of order in a restless world. You close your eyes, drifting into the rhythmless sleep that lies beyond all time. You stand at the edge of a muddy track somewhere in the English countryside. The year might be 1250, though the land itself could not tell you. The road is narrow, sunken between hedgerows, the ground rutted by cartwheels and hooves. Puddles reflect the pale sky. A thin mist clings to the edges of the fields. It is quiet here, only the creak of a distant wagon, the caw of a crow, the slow hum of unseen travelers making their way from one forgotten place to another. And yet, this simple track connects worlds. The ghost of Rome beneath your boots. Under the layers of mud and centuries of neglect lies the skeleton of something far older. A Roman road, laid down nearly 1,000 years before. Its stones still form the faint backbone of the medieval world. The Romans had built them with extraordinary precision, straight, layered, and enduring. The Via of Rome connected forts, cities, and ports, a web of stone that once bound an empire together. When Rome fell, its roads remained. For centuries they were neglected, overgrown, or scavenged for stone, but they never truly disappeared. They guided kings and pilgrims alike, ghosts of empire hidden beneath the feet of peasants. To walk upon one, even now, is to follow in the footprints of legionaries, merchants, and slaves. The Roman road was not only a path, it was a memory of order. The forgotten paths in the centuries that followed Rome's decline, Europe's roads fractured into 1,000 local tracks. Each village maintained only what it needed. Paths wound through forests, fords crossed rivers, bridges rotted or collapsed. In some places, travelers marked their way by shrines, stones, or the carved figures of saints. In others, they followed the ruts left by ox-drawn carts, trusting instinct and rumor more than maps. The journey from one town to another, even one only 20 miles away, could take days. Rain turned roads into quagmires. Snow rendered them impassable. Bandits lurked in narrow passes. Travel in the medieval sense was never undertaken lightly. Each journey was an act of endurance, the pilgrim's path, and yet people walked. In the 12th and 13th centuries, pilgrimage became a defining feature of medieval life. Men and women from every class set out on long, uncertain journeys to holy sites. Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, Rome, Jerusalem. They walked in groups, sleeping in barns or beneath hedges, carrying little more than a staff, a cloak, and faith. The roads they followed became known as pilgrim routes, and though they were often little more than rough tracks, they transformed Europe into a network of shared movement. Along these paths rose inns, chapels, and hospitals. Priories offered shelter to travelers. Bridges were built and maintained by guilds of fratres pontifices, bridge brothers. Step by step, pilgrimage rebuilt what empire had left behind. The road, once a tool of conquest, became a path of devotion, the king's highway by the 13th century. As trade and royal authority expanded, kings began to recognize the importance of maintaining roads. In England, royal decrees referred to the Via Regia, the king's highway, protected by law. To block or damage it was a serious offense. These roads connected royal courts, castles, and markets, ensuring that messengers and goods could travel under the king's peace. Still, they were far from smooth. The chronicler William of Malmesbury once described a traveller's misery on the road to London. The ruts are deep, the mud is thick, and the journey endless. Even the best routes were slow and unpredictable. A nobleman might spend a week travelling from Winchester to York, stopping often to repair wagons or wait for swollen rivers to subside. The road was not a convenience, it was a test of patience. The road builders in a small village near Charters. A group of labourers works under the weak autumn sun. They are mending a section of road that floods each spring. There are no machines, only picks, shovels, and wooden sledges. They dig a shallow trench, lay a bed of rough stones, and top it with gravel. At the sides they build small ditches to carry water away. It is slow, back-breaking work. But it matters. Without roads, markets cannot thrive, priests cannot reach their parishes, soldiers cannot move. The work of the road builder is as essential as that of any knight or abbot, though no one remembers their names. The toll roads as travel grew, so did the business of roads. Lords and abbeys began charging tolls for passage through their lands. A merchant's cart might pay a few pennies at each gate, bridge, or river crossing. The proceeds, at least in theory, went to maintain the road. In practice, they often went to the lord's coffers. Travellers grumbled, but they paid. A safe bridge or dry road was worth the price. The tollkeeper's hut became a familiar sight, a small wooden booth by the roadside with a hanging chain or gate to block the way. Sometimes a friendly smile greeted the traveller, other times a drawn spear. The road had become both opportunity and control, a reminder that every step in medieval life was taken under someone's authority. The life along the road was not just for travellers, it was a living ecosystem. At crossroads, small communities formed, inns, blacksmiths, farriers, stables, and chapels. A pilgrim could find food and rest in exchange for a few coins or labour. A merchant could repair his cart or buy new shoes for his oxen. Inns were rarely grand. A straw bed, a bowl of stew, and a place near the hearth were enough. But for those who lived on the road, pedlars, minstrels, friars, and thieves, these small sanctuaries meant survival. Each inn had its own rhythm. The creak of doors, the clatter of mugs, the murmur of strangers speaking in half-familiar tongues. Here, news spread faster than in any castle. Tales of wars, plagues, and miracles carried by wary travellers. The road was Europe's first network of information. The dangers of the way still, the road was perilous. Travellers risked more than fatigue. Robbers waited in forested stretches, wolves roamed at night. In some regions, the penalty for highway robbery was hanging. The corpses left on gibbets as grim warnings to others. But danger also came from nature. A sudden storm could flood a valley and wash away a bridge. A wheel could splinter on a hidden stone. A simple cut untreated on the journey could fester and end a life. To walk the medieval road was to live at the mercy of chance. the road and the faith, and yet the road was also a metaphor for life, for faith, for the long journey of the soul. Medieval sermons often spoke of via vita, the road of life, winding through hardship and temptation toward the gates of heaven. Pilgrims walking to Canterbury or Rome imagined themselves not merely moving through space, but through salvation. Each mile, each blister was a prayer. Even the ruts and mud became symbols, reminders that holiness was not reached on clean marble, but through dust and endurance. The weight of distance in the medieval mind was not measured by miles but by days. A merchant might say, "It is 4 days from Paris to Lyon," meaning not just distance but fatigue, danger and cost. Every journey had a weight, a price in effort and risk. To travel 50 miles could mean a week of walking. To cross the Alps, a month of hardship and prayer. Time and space were felt physically, in muscle and breath. When you stood upon a road, you did not simply see a line between 2 points. You saw the measure of your endurance, the echo of Rome again. By the end of the 13th century, new kings and kingdoms began to rediscover Rome's forgotten wisdom. Surveyors and masons studied the old roads, tracing their remains and rebuilding sections that had survived. In France and England, engineers began to layer roads once more with gravel and stone. In a few cities, notably Paris and London, cobbled streets appeared, smooth and hard beneath wagon wheels. It was a small return to an older order, a reminder that civilization, like a road, could be rebuilt stone by stone. You stand once again at the edge of that muddy track. The mist is lifting now. A small group of travelers passes. A merchant, 2 pilgrims, and a farmer driving an ox cart. Their journey will take days, perhaps weeks. They will face rain fatigue and the uncertain kindness of strangers. But they walk anyway, as countless others did before and after. The road endures because people do. You watch them disappear around a bend, the sound of their footsteps fading into the quiet fields. And you wonder if every step on these old paths carries the memory of those who walked before. Then how much of history lies buried beneath our own feet? The road begins to hum. Not with engines or carriages, but with life, with feet and hooves, with wooden wheels and the slow roll of time itself. It is now the 14th century. Europe, scarred by famine and war, is also beginning to awaken. Trade routes are expanding, towns are growing, and roads once meant for pilgrims now carry merchants, letters, and ideas. You walk along one of them, the King's Highway outside Paris, and though it looks simple, it is part of something vast, almost invisible, a web that connects cities, markets, and minds. The merchant's road, the merchant walks before dawn. His wagon creaks under the weight of wool and salt, his oxen plodding patiently. He wears a heavy cloak, patched and stiff with use, and carries a dagger not for show, but survival. The road he follows leads from Flanders to the Champagne fairs, the beating heart of medieval commerce. These fairs, held several times a year, drew merchants from across Europe, Italians with spices and silks, Englishmen with wool, Germans with metalwork, and Jews and Moors with fine glass, dyes and books. The roads to Champagne were among the best maintained in France, guarded by the Count's soldiers and cleared for miles around during the season. But outside the fair season, they returned to their usual state: mud, risk, and loneliness. The merchant knew every rut, every dangerous ford, every village with a decent tavern. His life was measured not in years, but in miles travelled and goods exchanged. To him the road was both opportunity and exhaustion, a line between profit and peril. The wagon trains trade in medieval Europe moved not in solitude but in caravans. Merchants banded together for safety, forming long wagon trains that snaked across the countryside. A typical caravan might include 20 or 30 wagons, dozens of oxen, guards on horseback, and cooks who lit campfires by the roadside each night. They carried everything imaginable: furs from the Baltic, grain from the plains, cloth from Flanders, wine from Gascony, iron from the Black Forest. The roads they followed, sometimes ancient Roman roads, sometimes rough local tracks, became arteries of wealth, and as trade grew, towns grew beside them. A roadside hamlet that once offered water and fodder might become a thriving market town within a generation. The road, without meaning to, built civilization. The messengers of kings, while merchants carried goods, another kind of traveller carried words. Messengers, kings, popes, and bishops relied on these riders to bridge the impossible distances between courts and fortresses. A royal messenger rode light and fast, often alone, changing horses at post stations along the way. Their letters were sealed with wax, stamped with the authority of crowns and rings. Through them, wars were declared, alliances formed, and orders given that shaped empires. But the journey was dangerous. A messenger could be robbed, lost, or killed, and a message delayed by a single day could change the outcome of a battle. To be a messenger in medieval Europe was to live at the edge of history, always in motion, never safe. And yet, through their constant travel, they kept kingdoms alive, binding far-flung lands through the fragile thread of communication. The church's roads, the church too, became a guardian of the road. Monasteries and abbeys often stood near key routes, offering food and rest to weary travelers. Hospices in the Alps, like the great St. Bernard and St. Gothard, provided shelter to pilgrims and merchants crossing dangerous passes. Monks cleared paths, built bridges, and kept fires burning to guide lost travelers through the snow. They recorded distances between abbeys, turning their ledgers into maps long before official charts existed. In a world where government was local and law was inconsistent, the church's network of roads and shelters provided the closest thing to a safe passage across Europe. It was not simply faith, it was infrastructure. The market towns by the late Middle Ages, roads converged upon something new, the market town. Every region had its day. On Mondays, people might walk to the wool market in Beverley. On Thursdays, they might sell fish in York. On Saturdays, they might buy iron tools in Lincoln. The rhythm of travel was tied to the rhythm of trade. Peasants brought their surplus grain. Women sold cheese and cloth, and local craftsmen bartered their work. Over time, these weekly markets grew into permanent centres. With cobbled squares, weighing stones, and guildhalls, a merchant who travelled between them would come to know not just the roads, but the very pulse of the land. The road connected not just towns, it connected economies, transforming self-sufficient villages into interdependent networks. It was, in a quiet way, the birth of capitalism. The roads of the East, while Western Europe's roads were often crude, the great routes of the East were ancient and astonishingly well maintained. The Silk Road, stretching from China to the Mediterranean, had been the world's most important artery for over 1,000 years. Even as Europe struggled with mud and tolls, caravans moved along the Silk Road bearing silk, porcelain, and spices, goods that would find their way into the hands of Venetian and Genoese merchants. To travel these routes was to walk through the world's diversity: Persians, Turks, Armenians, Mongols, and Arabs all meeting in caravanserais where languages mixed like trade winds. The medieval road, then, was not a European invention. It was a global inheritance. Europe's muddy tracks were but branches of a far older, grander network of human movement. The post roads. By the 15th century, a quiet revolution began. In the courts of Burgundy, Milan, and later the Habsburgs, rulers developed organized postal systems, post roads with designated relay stations where fresh horses waited day and night. The most famous was the Thurn-und-Taxis system of the Holy Roman Empire, which by the 1500s connected hundreds of towns with astonishing speed. A message could now travel from Brussels to Innsbruck in just a few days, faster than most peasants ever traveled in their lives. The road, once the domain of the slow and the devout, was becoming something entirely new, a tool of information. And information in time would change everything. The road and the plague, but not all that travelled by road was good. In 1347, the Black Death reached Europe. It came by ship, then by cart, then by foot, spreading along the same routes that carried trade and pilgrims. Within 2 years, tens of millions were dead. Roads once filled with wagons and travellers became silent. Villages emptied, markets closed. Yet even then, the roads endured. Monks travelled to bury the dead. Doctors rode to distant towns. And when the plague receded, those same roads carried labourers and survivors seeking new homes and wages. The road had brought death, but it also carried renewal. In its quiet, patient way, it always did. The builder's legacy. As the centuries turned, the builders of roads became less visible but more vital. In France, royal engineers called pavers began paving urban streets. In England, statutes required local parishes to maintain highways near towns. The road had become an object of law, a shared responsibility. Travellers, merchants, priests, and kings alike owed their mobility to the invisible labour of countless workers. Men and women who dug ditches, hauled stones, and shaped the earth with nothing but sweat and time. Their names are lost, but their work remains beneath every modern street. Every highway, every lane that curves between fields, every cobbled bridge, all are descendants of their persistence. The language of the road, even language itself, carries their mark. Words like journey come from journey, a day's travel, travel from travail, meaning toil or hardship, highway from herweg, the raised road that stood above the marsh. To move through the world was, in medieval thought, a kind of labour. one that shaped both body and soul. The road was not a symbol of freedom, it was a teacher of endurance. The quiet web by the 15th century, Europe was laced with thousands of roads, some ancient, some new, many still rough and unreliable. And yet, together they formed something remarkable, a living web. Ideas began to travel as fast as goods. Scholars carried manuscripts between monasteries, artisans shared techniques across borders. Pilgrims brought home not only relics but stories. A road that began in Florence might lead, through a series of humble towns, to Paris, then Bruges, then London, carrying with it the sparks of the Renaissance. No one planned this network. It grew organically, out of need and motion, a monument to the slow collaboration of centuries. You pause at a crossroads at dusk. One road leads toward the mountains, another toward the sea. A post rider passes at full gallop, a leather satchel bouncing at his side. A merchant caravan rattles by, lanterns glowing faintly in the mist. From the east, a group of monks approach, singing low hymns as they walk. All of them are moving, forward, outward, endlessly. The world hums with connection, though none of them see it yet. Each traveler is a thread, each road a line in the great web of history. And as the darkness gathers, you wonder, when does a road cease to be just a path and become a force that shapes entire civilizations? It is the dawn of the 16th century. The medieval world, wary and wondrous, is slowly giving way to something new. A world of kings with maps, merchants with ledgers, and builders with plans. The road, once built by hand and hope, now becomes a project of nations. And yet, even as the future begins to take shape, its roots remain buried in the slow, patient work of centuries. The forgotten craft of the road builder. The age of rebuilding across Europe. The road was being rediscovered. Old Roman highways were surveyed, measured, and repaired. New routes were carved through forests and hills. The kings of France, England, and Spain saw roads not as conveniences, but as symbols of power. To rule effectively, one needed to move armies, letters, and taxes quickly. Thus began the reconstruction of Europe's arteries. In France, the Corvée des Chemins law required peasants to give a certain number of days each year to road maintenance. It was unpopular, exhausting work for little reward, but it rebuilt the backbone of royal travel. In England, statutes like the Highways Act of 1555 ordered parishes to repair local roads, overseen by surveyors appointed by the crown. For the first time since Rome, road building became a matter of national concern. But the difference was this: where Rome had built for empire, Europe was building for connection. The engineer emerges. In the Middle Ages, roads were made by habit, widened paths, worn by feet, patched when needed. But now a new figure appeared, the engineer. He carried compasses and chains, studied soil and gradient, and thought not of a single road but of a system. In France, engineers from the Corps Poncelet Chaussées began standardizing designs, ditches for drainage, layers of gravel, crown, shaped surfaces to shed rain. In Italy, Leonardo da Vinci sketched ideal roads, double-laned, with covered sidewalks and drainage channels. In England, Thomas Telford and later John Macadam would refine these ideas into the modern macadam road, compacted stone surfaces, dry, durable, and smooth. But even before those names became known, the seeds were planted here, in the late medieval period, among the slow builders who understood that a road could be designed, not just endured. The world expands. The 16th century was the age of exploration. Ships carried men across oceans, but the journey always began on land, down the same dusty roads that had existed for centuries. A sailor walking to Bristol or Lisbon would follow routes once used by monks or masons. A scholar carrying manuscripts to a printing house in Mainz would walk the same lanes that pilgrims had followed to shrines. The medieval road had become the first link in a global chain, from the village to the port, from the port to the world. Every empire that rose from exploration, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, English, relied first on the quiet endurance of the inland road. The new travelers, with the rise of trade and peace, a new kind of traveler began to appear, one who walked not for profit or penance, but curiosity. Scholars, courtiers, and even artists took to the roads to see the world beyond their towns. Their letters described landscapes and cities with a wonder once reserved for scripture. From Rouen to Paris, wrote one, the road is lined with orchards and small churches. Each village smells of bread and rain. For the first time, travel itself began to hold meaning. What had once been hardship became slowly experience. And though these early travelers still faced mud, tolls, and danger, their journeys marked the birth of something profoundly modern: the idea that movement was not merely necessity, but knowledge. The toll and the bridge. Every road has its price. By the late Middle Ages, tolls were everywhere. small fees collected at bridges, gates, and crossroads. Some were ancient rights, inherited from lords, others were new, granted by royal charter. At best, tolls funded maintenance. At worst, they became instruments of greed. But tolls also reflected a truth. The road was no longer just a public path. It was property, a managed and monetized space. Bridge building became a profession of prestige. In Italy, the construction of stone bridges, like the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, turned infrastructure into art. Each arch was both beauty and utility, a promise that the path ahead would endure. And so, by stone and silver, Europe learned to build permanence into its roads. The mapmakers, to make a road is one thing, to understand where it leads is another. The medieval traveller had relied on memory and rumour, but now cartographers began to change that. In 1375, the Catalan Atlas depicted trade routes stretching from Europe to Asia, a web of lines that seemed to bring the whole world within reach. By the 16th century, maps were everywhere, painted, printed, sold, and studied. Roads were measured in miles, rivers traced, towns marked by spires and gates. For the first time, travellers could plan a journey with foresight rather than faith. The road, once an act of trust, became an object of reason. The inn and the stagecoach, as roads improved, so did the inns that lined them. What had once been a straw bed in a barn became a 2-story building with stable, tavern, and signboard. Travellers began to expect comfort. Not luxury, but predictability. And then, something revolutionary appeared: the coach. Drawn by teams of horses, it carried passengers swiftly between cities, stopping at designated posting houses to change horses. By the 17th century, stagecoaches linked London to York, Paris to Lyon, Madrid to Seville. Journeys that once took weeks now took days. The medieval road at last was becoming a highway. And yet, each new innovation rested on ancient foundations, on the same roads that had once echoed with pilgrims' footsteps. The road and the state, the growth of modern states, transformed the meaning of roads. For medieval kings, roads had been instruments of power. For modern governments, they became instruments of unity. A road connected distant provinces, carried taxes, and allowed armies to move swiftly. The more connected a realm became, the more governable it was. Thus, roads became not only tools of travel, but symbols of sovereignty. To pave a road was to claim a country. In France, Louis XIV's engineers extended royal highways from Paris like rays of the sun, straight, wide, and bordered by trees. In England, turnpike trusts were established, funded by investors who saw profit in movement. And in all of this, the stone, the sweat, the law, the medieval spirit lingered. That simple belief that the world could be bound together by the persistence of the road. The echo beneath the asphalt today. We speed along highways that cross entire nations in a day. We no longer think of mud, tolls, or hunger. But beneath the asphalt, beneath the concrete, the old paths still lie. Every modern highway follows a ghost. The Roman via, the medieval track, the pilgrim's road, the merchant's path. Each curve and junction holds the memory of feet that walked long before the notion of speed existed. In every city, you can still trace them, narrow streets that once led to markets, lanes that follow the forgotten line of an ancient way. The road never truly dies, it only changes form. The road as time, the road is not just a line through space, it is a line through time. It connects not only places, but moments, one century to the next, one life to another. The mason who laid stones for a bridge in 1275 could never imagine that 800 years later, travellers in metal carriages would cross it in seconds. And yet, in a sense, he built that future. Every road, however humble, is a promise that someone will come after, that movement will continue. Even the most boring roads of medieval Europe were acts of hope. They said, silently, the world will keep walking. You stand once more on that same old track, the one that began beneath Roman stones and wound through centuries of mud, prayer, and ambition. The mist has lifted entirely now. The horizon stretches wide. You can almost see the faint shimmer of asphalt in the far distance. A line that began right here, in the slow footsteps of those who built without knowing what they were building. And as you listen to the quiet hum of the land, you wonder if every road is a story of connection, then perhaps all of history is simply the long journey of finding our way to one another. It begins with a sound. Not the voice of a king, nor the bells of a cathedral, but the quiet turning of a wheel, wood against water, creaking timbers, a steady rhythm, older than memory. For centuries, this was the true sound of civilization, the murmur of the mill. Long before the scream of steam engines or the hum of electricity, watermills turned day and night, grinding grain, forging iron, weaving cloth, and sawing wood. They were the first machines of Europe, patient, tireless, and alive with motion. and through them, the medieval world learned to harness power. The ancient idea, the notion of using water to turn a wheel, was not new. It appears in Roman records. The engineer Vitruvius described it in the 1st century BCE. But when the Roman Empire fell, many of its grand technologies fell silent. The aqueducts cracked, the cities shrank, and the workshops went dark. Yet the mill remained. Why? Because it was small, simple, useful. Unlike a palace or a fortress, a mill could be built by a village. It didn't need marble or legions, just wood, water, and patience. So while empires crumbled, the wheel kept turning. And by the time medieval Europe began to awaken in the 10th century, the sound of mills filled every valley. The millwright behind every turning wheel stood a craftsman, the millwright. He was neither mason nor carpenter, but both. He worked with wood and iron, with rope and water. His job was not to create something beautiful, though many mills were, but something that worked. He studied the slope of the stream, the flow of the current, the strength of the beams. He was an engineer before the word existed. A good millwright was valued by every lord and village. He could bring life to a settlement, for where there was a mill, there was food. In a time when hunger was constant, the turning wheel was not just a machine, it was salvation. The heart of the village, imagine a small medieval village. Smoke rising from thatched roofs, chickens in the road, a church bell tolling faintly. At the edge of the village, near a bend in the stream, stands the mill. Its walls are rough stone. The wheel is broad and wet with spray. Inside, the air smells of flour and oak dust. Every few moments, a dull thud shakes the floor, the sound of millstones grinding together. Villagers come and go with sacks of grain on their backs. The miller, often dusty and half deaf from the noise, weighs each load, takes his portion, the mulcher, and sends the rest back as fine, white meal. Children watch through the doorway as the gears turn above their heads, fascinated by the steady dance of cogs and levers. To them, it must seem like magic, the river's invisible hand doing the work of 10 men. The miller's reputation. The miller was a strange figure in medieval life, necessary but often mistrusted. He dealt in numbers, weights, and shares, things few villagers understood. If someone's flour came back lighter than expected, was it bad luck or trickery? Thus the miller became a stock character in medieval tales, clever, sometimes greedy, always dusty. Chaucer's miller in the Canterbury Tales was red, bearded and bawdy, his bag of grain forever suspect. Yet for all the jokes, no village could do without him. The miller stood between hunger and plenty, a reminder that technology, however humble, always comes with human complexity. Power from water, how did it work? At its simplest, a watermill turns falling or running water into motion. The wheel, horizontal or vertical, captures the force of the current. This motion travels through an axle to a system of gears and shafts, which in turn spin the millstones or hammers inside. There were 3 main types of medieval waterwheel: undershot, the stream flows beneath the wheel. Common, simple but less powerful. Overshot, the stream pours over the top, more complex but efficient. Breastshot, the water strikes the middle, a compromise of both. Each design reflected the land, the gradient of the stream, the wealth of the owner, and the ingenuity of the builder. And as the centuries passed, the millwrights learned to adapt the same principle to every kind of work. Beyond grain, at first, mills were for grinding flour, the most essential task. But soon, they were everywhere doing everything. There were fulling mills, pounding wool into cloth. Iron mills with great hammers driven by water power. Tanning mills, mixing hides and lime. Paper mills, pulping rags into sheets. Even sawmills, turning forest timber into planks. By the 13th century, a single river valley could support dozens of mills, each with its own rhythm. The soundscape of medieval Europe was not silence, but motion. A constant mechanical heartbeat. Some historians have called this the first industrial revolution, centuries before steam. And perhaps they are right. Lords' and monks' mills were valuable, and so, like everything valuable, they became the property of power. Feudal lords built them and demanded payment from anyone who used them. A peasant might own his land, but he could not grind his grain without the lord's permission. These were called banal mills, compulsory, profitable, and tightly controlled. Monasteries, too, built vast networks of mills. Cistercian monks, in particular, became master engineers. Their abbeys, at fountains Clairvaux and Revolx, had water systems that powered forges, workshops, and kitchens. To the monks, water was both spiritual and practical. It symbolized purity, but it also provided power. Thus, beneath the quiet chants of prayer, the water wheels turned ceaselessly, serving both God and bread. The mill stream as civilization. Look closely at any medieval map. and you will find it a thin blue line winding through every settlement, the stream. Follow it, and you follow the logic of life itself. It watered the fields, cooled the blacksmith's fire, and turned the mill wheel. Entire communities were built around its course, its flow dictating where houses stood, where roads crossed, where markets gathered. To control the stream was to control destiny. So, mill races were dug, channels carved, dams built, not by great kings, but by villagers with shovels and faith. Every drop of water that passed beneath a wheel was a tiny act of civilization. A world in motion. By the late Middle Ages, Europe's rivers were alive with industry. Travelers described entire valleys filled with mills, their wheels turning in sequence, one after another, catching and releasing the same current. From the air, it would have looked like a chain of slow, spinning gears, stretching for miles. This was the world's first mechanical landscape. And yet, no one called it that. To the people who lived there, it was simply life. The sound of bread being born, of cloth being made, of tools being forged. The mill that never slept. Unlike humans, a watermill could work endlessly. So long as the river ran, the wheel turned. Night and day, through winter and summer, the steady rotation marked time more reliably than any clock. In some abbeys, monks measured their prayers to the creak of the wheel. In towns, people fell asleep to its rhythm. It was the background hum of existence, invisible, essential, eternal. And when one mill broke, it was repaired not with ceremony but with urgency. Because if the wheel stopped, life itself slowed. The mill, then, was not just a machine. It was a philosophy, the belief that nature's flow could be guided, that motion itself could serve human need, and that belief would, in time, lead to every other form of power humanity would ever harness, from the sails of ships to the pistons of engines. But for now, in the hush of the medieval valley, the water still turns, the stones still grind, and the air still smells of wet flour and wood smoke. The wheel sings its ancient song, quiet, endless, and utterly human. When you imagine a medieval monastery, you might picture stillness, grey stone, bowed heads, the soft shuffle of sandals in shadowed halls. But step closer to the water's edge, and you will hear a different kind of prayer, the rush of the mill race, the hiss of water striking wood, the grind of turning wheels deep within the abbey walls. For behind those walls, behind the chanting and the candles, medieval monks were building one of the most sophisticated technological networks Europe had ever seen, and they did it in silence. The abbey as a machine, a great monastery of the 12th or 13th century, was not simply a house of prayer. It was an organism, alive, complex, and astonishingly efficient. Each building had a purpose: the church, the dormitory, the refectory, the cloister, the infirmary. And beneath them all, unseen but vital, ran a system of water channels, the arteries of the abbey. These channels powered mills, flushed drains, filled fish ponds, turned lathes, cooled cellars, and even heated rooms through clever loops of circulating flow. Water was not just symbolic, it was infrastructure. To walk through a monastery like Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, or Clairvaux in France, was to walk through a living machine. Every stream and pipe, every wheel and sluice, was placed with monastic precision, not for profit, but for order. The Cistercians and the art of control. If one order embodied this harmony of faith and engineering, it was the Cistercians. They sought simplicity and purity, a return to hard labor, quiet contemplation, and isolation from worldly distraction. But their pursuit of simplicity required remarkable complexity. They chose remote valleys, often wilderness or swamp, and transformed them into self-sufficient marvels. At Revaux Abbey, the monks redirected an entire river system to feed multiple mills. At Clairvaux, they built underground channels so precise that water still flows through some of them today. At Fontenay, they powered bellows for a full iron forge, perhaps the first industrial facility in Europe. Their guiding principle was both spiritual and mechanical. Ora et labora, pray and work. To pray they needed silence, to work they needed movement, and water provided both, invisible, tireless, obedient. The lay brothers, not every monk was a scholar. Many were lay brothers, men of the soil and craft who joined the order to work, not to chant. They were the hands of the abbey, millers, carpenters, smiths, and masons. While the choir monks prayed 7 times a day, the lay brothers managed the farms, tended the mills, and ran the machinery. Their daily routine was a balance of devotion and practicality. At dawn, they would check the sluice gates, ensuring the flow to the wheel was steady. They would grace the axles, inspect the cogs, test the millstones for wear. If a wheel cracked or a channel clogged with ice, they would rise in the night to repair it. For though they labored in the shadow of the cloister, They knew that every turn of the wheel was an act of worship, a physical prayer. The script of water. Imagine the abbey's watercourse as a written text, a script penned by engineers of faith. It begins high in the hills, where a spring or brook is diverted into a narrow race. From there, it flows through stone culverts and wooden flumes, dropping in measured gradients to create pressure and speed. At each juncture, a gate or trough splits the flow, one branch to the mill, another to the forge, another to the kitchen. Some abbeys even installed settling ponds to trap silt before it could foal the wheels. The system was endlessly balanced. Too much water, and the wheel would splinter; too little, and the stones would stall. It required constant vigilance, adjustment, and care. Each day the monks walked the length of these channels, inspecting, listening, feeling. They knew their water's moods like a friend's, how it changed with season, how it murmured before a storm. The abbey mill at the heart of the system stood the mill itself. It was not grand, but it was sacred. The great wheel turned in a cool, shaded chamber fed by the race outside. Within, the millstones spun, one fixed, one moving, grinding grain from the abbey's vast estates. The flour would be carried to the bakehouse, where loaves were made daily for monks and workers alike. Nothing was wasted. The bran fed the pigs, the husks became fodder, and when the wheel slowed, the monks recited psalms as they cleaned and repaired it, words and motion blending into one seamless rhythm. To them, machinery was not noise or chaos. It was order, the physical manifestation of divine law. Just as God set the heavens in motion, so too did man, in humble imitation, set the wheel turning. The first factories historians have sometimes called the Cistercian abbeys the first factories. And though the term is anachronistic, it holds a kernel of truth. They practiced specialization, each mill, forge, and tannery dedicated to a specific task. They used automation, letting water replace human labor. They practiced mass production. Their ironworks and cloth mills supplied entire regions. At Fontenay, for instance, the monks smelted and hammered iron on an industrial scale. The water wheel drove a massive set of bellows, feeding air into the furnace, a continuous measured breath. Elsewhere, at Seek-Toaks, they operated fulling mills that processed cloth for sale, generating revenue that funded further expansion. And yet, this innovation was never seen as progress for its own sake. It was discipline. To the monks, control over water mirrored control over the soul. To master the wheel was to master one's own impulses, to order chaos into purpose. The sounds of faith. If you could stand within one of those abbeys in the 13th century, you would hear something remarkable. The chanting of monks at prayer, echoing through stone halls, the splash of water beneath the floor, the distant thud of a hammer or the whisper of a turning wheel. It was the music of devotion and labor intertwined. The same hands that copied sacred texts also oiled axles. The same minds that debated theology also designed hydraulic systems. In that balance, between contemplation and craft, medieval Europe found its quiet revolution, power and silence, and yet there was a paradox. The very success of these systems drew attention and envy. Lords and kings saw the profit. Merchants saw opportunity. By the 14th century, the monasteries' control over mills and water rights was vast. Their estates spanned valleys, their channels diverted rivers. Some accused them of hoarding power, not just spiritual, but literal. Conflicts arose over water access, tolls, and land. Peasants complained that the abbey's diversions left their fields dry. Even in this age of faith, technology carried its price. Still, the monks persisted, adjusting flows, mending dams, balancing need and virtue as best they could. To them, each repair was an act of stewardship, not greed. They did not own the water. They served it. The turning point by the late Middle Ages, the knowledge cultivated in these quiet valleys began to spread beyond monastic walls. Secular millwrights learned from the monks' designs. Towns adopted their techniques, building municipal mills for public use. The water wheel, once a symbol of isolation and devotion, became an engine of commerce. In this way, the monasteries had unknowingly laid the groundwork for something far greater. A society organized not only around prayer or war, but around production. The rhythm of water had become the rhythm of civilization itself. The breath of the abbey even centuries later, when many of those abbeys lay in ruin, travelers still heard the whisper of their streams. At fountains, the channels still ran clear. At Revaux, the old mill race shimmered in moonlight. At Fontenay, the forge still stood, its silent bellows waiting for air. The monks were gone, their voices faded, their prayers dissolved into history, but the water kept moving, as it always had. It was as though the land itself remembered their discipline, their patience, their order. In the endless motion of the stream, One could still sense the hum of their labor, a hymn to quiet progress. And you, standing there beside the cold water and the moss-covered stones, might wonder when faith built machines. Did the monks realize what they had begun? Did they sense that the humble wheel turning in their cloister would one day turn the entire world?